Traveling to the U.S. under Donald Trump can carry a lot of emotional baggage.
He created an atmosphere that's very hostile for us.
With everything going on south of the border, it just seemed to be a lot safer to just travel within Canada.
New numbers from Statistics Canada show return trips from the U.S. in May dropped 32% compared to last year.
Well, newly released travel data suggests Canadians are still staying away from the U.S., with Donald Trump's trade war leaving many of them making alternative travel plans.
It seems more Canadian snowbirds are deciding to fly elsewhere this winter to avoid the U.S. as their vacation destination.
The number of Canadians crossing the border has been steadily dropping, and a new survey finds the trend is likely to continue well into next year.
It began quietly, not with protests or speeches, but with something far more unsettling: silence. A silence that stretched across airports, border towns, shopping centers, and digital ledgers. A silence powerful enough to carry a $10 billion message. For months, Washington dismissed the early signs as statistical noise, seasonal shifts, currency quirks, pandemic aftershocks. But the latest numbers show something else entirely. Canada, America's closest neighbor, economic partner, and longest-standing ally, has launched a silent boycott so vast and so deeply rooted in everyday behavior that it's already rewriting the balance of power on the continent. And the data pouring out of Ottawa shows a transformation Americans were never meant to see. The shock began with a single line in a Statistics Canada release, one that the U.S. media barely covered. Canadian travel to the United States had plunged by double digits for a third consecutive quarter. Airline traffic fell 24% year over year. Cross-border land trips dropped even further. But the real alarm came from a number buried deep in the report. The estimated total spending Canadians withheld from the U.S. economy now surpassed $10 billion in the last year alone. What looked like a fluctuation turned out to be a pattern, and what looked like a pattern turned out to be a choice. The boycott was never announced. No politician held a podium and declared it. No viral slogan appeared on social media. Instead, it formed in the collective psyche of millions of ordinary Canadians, each making small personal decisions that added up to a geopolitical rupture. A family in Ontario choosing to visit the Maritimes instead of Michigan. A retiree in Vancouver skipping weekend shopping in Bellingham for the first time in 20 years. Students in Montreal shifting online spending to European retailers. Logistics firms rerouting freight through Halifax instead of U.S. hubs. None of them coordinated. None of them declared their intentions. But together, they built the most consequential economic message Canada has sent to the United States. In decades, Washington underestimated the psychology. For years, American policymakers assumed Canada's reliance on U.S. markets, goods, and travel was so deeply embedded that it could never shift. But economic behavior is shaped by trust, and something broke that trust. Analysts in Ottawa point to three catalysts: the trade threats, the tariffs, and the political rhetoric flowing out of Washington. But the most important factor wasn't anger, it was realization. Canadians woke up to the scale of their dependency on the U.S. and discovered that pulling back, even slightly, gave them unprecedented leverage. The numbers show how quickly that awareness turned into action. Nearly 5 million fewer cross-border shopping trips were recorded last year. Credit card data shows a 9% drop in Canadian spending at U.S. retailers, both online and in person. Airline booking platforms report a 12% shift from U.S.-bound flights to domestic or European destinations. Even American digital subscriptions, from streaming services to software, saw a measurable decline among Canadian users. Individually, these changes seem trivial. Collectively, they represent a tectonic shift in the flow of North American money. What frightens Washington isn't just the current impact. It's the trajectory behavior that lasts 6 months becomes habit. Behavior that lasts a year becomes culture. And the data suggests Canadians are already settling into a new normal, one where the U.S. is no longer the automatic default choice. Analysts at Canada's largest banks have begun tracking what they call post-dependence consumer drift, the gradual migration of spending away from American companies toward domestic or international alternatives. It is quiet, it is slow, and it is relentless. The U.S. cannot publicly acknowledge this without admitting a deeper vulnerability. For decades, America assumed Canada needed it more than it needed Canada. That assumption is now being tested. Canadian tourism alone once fed billions into American border towns, casinos, malls, and outlet centers. Today, parking lots that were once filled with Ontario plates sit half empty. Local U.S. chambers of commerce along the northern border are reporting their worst Canadian traffic in over 15 years. Yet the federal government avoids the subject entirely for one reason. The numbers reveal a loss of influence, and influence is Washington's most valuable currency. Meanwhile, the boycott's effects extend far beyond travel. Canadian companies are shifting procurement sources at a rate that alarms U.S. exporters. Industrial parts once purchased from Midwest suppliers are now coming from Germany and South Korea. Farm imports are being diversified to reduce reliance on U.S. agribusiness. Even energy contracts, long the backbone of continental integration, are being quietly renegotiated to include Asian and European partners. The $10 billion figure represents consumer behavior, but the true impact of corporate realignment is likely several times larger, hidden in supply chains that stretch from Vancouver to St. John's. What makes this even more unsettling is the emotional detachment behind it. This isn't a fiery public protest driven by outrage. This is a cold recalibration driven by caution. Canadians began asking themselves a simple question: why rely so heavily on a neighbor whose political climate is becoming unpredictable? That question spread not through slogans, but through families, workplaces, and daily interactions. It spread through conversations about tariffs, border disruptions, and diplomatic tensions. It spread through stories of travelers delayed, shipments held, and investments threatened. Slowly, a consensus emerged, not one of hostility, but one of self-preservation. The psychology of this shift is crucial. Silent boycotts are the most dangerous kind because they cannot be negotiated with. There are no leaders to persuade, no organizations to pressure, no protests to contain. A silent boycott is woven into personal decisions, into habits and routines. It becomes invisible and unbreakable. That is why Washington fears the data numbers don't argue. Numbers don't negotiate. Numbers don't forget. The biggest warning sign for U.S. policymakers is the generational gap. Young Canadians, those aged 18 to 35, are the least engaged with American products and travel. Surveys show they are more likely to vacation in Europe than in Florida, more likely to buy Korean electronics than American ones, and more likely to consume Canadian or international media than U.S. content. For the first time in modern memory, a generation of Canadians is emerging that does not instinctively look south. Once a generation adopts new preferences, it rarely returns to the old ones. The shift is reinforced by a Canadian economy increasingly oriented toward non-U.S. markets. Ottawa's new trade strategy quietly diversifies partnerships across Asia and Europe. Canadian shipping routes are being redesigned around Atlantic and Pacific gateways that bypass traditional American distribution hubs. Even Canadian tourism boards are investing heavily in domestic travel campaigns that, intentionally or not, keep money inside the country instead of sending it over the border. All of these changes, individually small, collectively form the infrastructure of permanence. The United States now faces a challenge it never anticipated. How do you stop a boycott that no one declared? How do you reverse a trend that no one is leading? How do you rebuild trust with a population that has already moved on psychologically? These questions have begun circulating within American think tanks, but few officials are willing to confront them publicly. Admitting that a $10 billion hole has formed in America's northern economic artery would be acknowledging a loss of control. And in geopolitics, perception is power. Yet the truth is unavoidable. Economic behavior is revealing a new North American reality. The continent's most stable relationship is quietly being rewritten from the ground up. Not through diplomacy, not through conflict, but through millions of individual choices. Choices that are now reshaping trade flows, tourism patterns, political leverage, and cultural ties. Canada's silent boycott is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of evolution. A realignment born from caution, strengthened by habit, and accelerated by data. The United States can ignore the headlines, but it cannot ignore the numbers. Those numbers tell a story the White House doesn't want to hear. Canadians are no longer looking south with the same instinctive trust. They are looking inward, outward, and elsewhere. And the longer this continues, the more irreversible it becomes. In the end, the most unsettling truth is the quietest one. A boycott announced with megaphones can be negotiated. A boycott formed in silence cannot. The data doesn't show a temporary dip. It shows a turning point, a continental shift already in motion. And somewhere in Washington, behind closed doors, policymakers are beginning to realize the magnitude of what has happened. North America has crossed a line. And there may be no clear path back.